First of all, I'm really delighted to join all of you today in sharing what 5G can do for businesses and society as a whole. A bit of background about myself, as Annie mentioned, Faisal Mahomed, who I lead Enterprise's standalone portfolio businesses. One of those business units is media and broadcast, which serves international broadcasters and media companies around the world. And I have done that since 2019. So probably just a quick question is, I was wondering how many of you may be aware of BT's history within broadcast. Often BT is associated as a telco only organization through broadband and mobile networks. But actually as an organization, BT Media and Broadcast has been serving television and video needs really since its advent for decades. We serve some of the biggest brands that you'd recognize around the world, ranging from the BBC, NBC, Viacom, into Asia, Star India, and so really a whole breadth of customers. And much of the center of the universe for this organization revolves around the BT Tower, which is an operational building which every single day runs around 24,000 hours of content that reaches your television screens or your devices around the country and the world. BT Media Broadcast has also been involved in the number of developments of key technologies over its history, right the way from the early 90s, whereby we delivered the first HD transmission, international live, all the way to most recently in the past couple of years, where we delivered the world's first smart broadcast platform, which allows you to control your content from anywhere in the planet. And then also the first live 8K broadcast of a sporting event. And many of these milestones have led to awards for the organization, whether it's best of show from the industry, Emmy Awards, but also from key partners and customers over the years. So 5G, when it came around, was a really important technology for us. As an organization, we've always strived to look at how we integrate newer technologies to deliver better, clearer, more resilient broadcasts for our customers and also ultimately viewers at home. And for us, 5G was really the idea of having a guaranteed bandwidth for live transmission, which allows networks to have a network management effect, to have a granular control of capacity, enable different channels. But what we really needed to do was build that amongst a consortium of organizations. So if I just give you a bit of a background, I'm sure those from hearing the call before, you may already be familiar with 5G on what exactly a 5G private network means for us, and then using that how we would deploy it going forwards. For us, it was really it's a custom built, dedicated and optimized mobile network to be used at any location. And the way that we explain it to our customers and colleagues is, if you imagine having a motorway, a motorway generally will be contended traffic. You have different cars or lorries or vans operating in different manners. So sometimes it can be quite challenging to plan broadcasts, data transfers, or different types of communication. What a 5G private network for us encompasses is really a private, motorway, a dedicated road that's free of other traffic, exclusive to the event or the broadcaster, which means we can choose what type of vehicles go on, how fast they can go, the type of the timings of usage. We can increase and decrease capacity. And for us, that flexibility of 5G private networks versus traditional methods of transmitting broadcast signals, whether it's Wi-Fi or radio frequencies, offers our customers and viewers not just ultimate flexibility in production, but a better experience on what people are seeing at home. So over the course of the past year, BT, EE, BT Sport, and a whole range of partner organisations, whether it's Neutral Wireless, VisiLink, started designing what this could look like in a live sporting event. And sporting events for us are probably the most critical and the most challenging events to do. First of all, the live. You have high amounts of data transfer. These are matches watched around by millions or billions when it comes to the Premier League around the world. And generally the SLAs for continuous broadcasts are quite high. So for us, it was the perfect test case. So earlier this year, we built a private 5G network in the StoneX Stadium, which is a UK rugby stadium for Saracens. And what we did effectively, at the two corners of the stadium, we had receivers for 5G. And this gave us almost complete control for broadcast TV signals. The low latency allowed for cameras on the sidelines, which you can see in the picture here, to freely roam around the pitch, which didn't have the restriction of wires, which means from a production standpoint, you can bring fans closer to the game, get access into more areas. Some of this technology, some people can argue that, does exist with radio frequency. But if you remember the analogy of the motorway, there's more that you can do with this. So suddenly on this 5G private network, in contrast to RF technology, you can have talkback, total camera control, monitoring made all over a single platform, which offers up real benefits for broadcasters for better operational efficiencies, redesigned workflows, and ultimately cheaper costs. So the Saracens game was the first success of this year, and it was done on a fairly limited scale within a rugby environment. Then more recently, we then moved on to probably the biggest challenge or the biggest opportunity, depending on how you look at it, of delivering parts of the Commonwealth Games through a private 5G network in collaboration with the BBC. We wanted to see in a large multi-country type event, what would be the areas that we need to work on before large-scale deployments. So we trialed it using on the baton relay, but also on the One Show, which was the key program that would open the games as such. And this was for not just a UK audience, but a global audience. So the stakes were pretty high. First of all, what we did, instead of what would be an outside broadcast truck, we would then use the two cells, as I mentioned, for the rugby. And then we'd have, again, the untethered cameras, which would connect via fibre into the BBC's internet gateway. What this allowed us to do was to move capacity up and down, depending on the type of transmission and content that was being shown. And if you can imagine, this was being filmed in the city centre, which was Birmingham's Victoria Square. And normally, where you have lots high concentration of people with high mobile contention, a 5G private network actually enables for you to have that uncontended, almost high-speed motorway, but with the ultimate flexibility of moving your cameras without wires dragging around and areas being cordoned off. And what this really demonstrated to us as an organization was that 5G private network can really handle large scale remotely produced events. It could better support live operations through flexibility, giving better reliability, and allowed cameras to interchange and to give a better production range across any particular event. So 5G for us has really been an eye-opener and a game changer of how sporting events can be changed in terms of production and transmission. But we're not stopping there, because clearly, 5G is only the first step of a wider journey. And last year, BT Media and Broadcast, we signed an agreement with OneWeb for low orbit satellites. And we're currently testing on how we connect 5G running through low orbit satellites as a backhaul for areas whereby we want to produce events or news feeds that may not have fiber or high capacity backhaul capability. So if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, you can imagine outside an event, you had your camera, which would then connect into the first truck. That's a production truck. Then would go into a connectivity truck, which would be a fiber into the cabinet, and a traditional backup satellite that we use on one of our satellite farms. But suddenly now we've got a total change in operational management. You just have the camera, which would be connected via a 5G private network into what would be a suitcase-sized, receiving hub, and then can be transmitted back, whether it's by fiber, via satellite, or low Earth orbit connectivity. So really, for us as an organisation, and what we're able to do for our customers and the end viewers is give greater production flexibility using high bandwidth, low latency, reliable wireless networks. But 5G, for BT, doesn't really just stop at media and broadcast and for production companies. 5G is transforming a whole range of verticals, whether it's from transport and logistics and integration with IoT, port operations, and how you have private networks within environments that allow secure, safe interconnectivity between different operations, health, and manufacturing. So for us, the ability to use 5G across our network is quite transformational. So finally, just to summarize what 5G has meant for us within the sporting landscape and beyond, it really has pushed what is the art of the possible in production flexibility, allowing broadcasters to produce wherever, whenever, and in a different manner to they have been before. The connectivity, the requirements of kit is a lot smaller, which actually really impacts on how it's set up, the environmental footprint. There's no longer truckloads of equipment and people that need to be transported about. A handful of operational folk can have this set up, which really has huge benefits for production companies and broadcasters. But more and more, testing and succeeding in delivering live broadcasts over 5G has really opened up, the possibilities of what we can do in other verticals. So hopefully that gives you a very quick overview of how we've been using 5G in real live context, in real operational environments currently now, ahead of fully operationalizing and launching this proposition within the broadcast markets in the coming year. So I think with that, that's it from me.
That was great. So one thing I think is slightly ironic, but really exciting, is because now you don't need these monster trucks and the power cables and the whole production suites, in situ. I just think it's really interesting how it opens up many more venues. I mean, whether you're into music or sport or and also more sports that don't get coverage. And I just think it's also interestingly maybe strengthening the arm of the regular broadcasters as opposed to the digital. I mean, for a live broadcast, because if you only had to watch how many people complained that Paul McCartney wasn't showed live last year at Glastonbury. I mean, it was showed later, but so many people were furious. I mean, it just indicates that there's a huge appetite for life and being in the moment, So I think that's a really interesting aspect.
And I think you're absolutely spot on, Annie. When you're setting up high-profile events, you need to ensure that you have, fiber connectivity. You need to arrange for staff to be available on shift. You need capacity availability on the network. You need trucks to be available. Yeah. That whole ecosystem needs to be set up. But suddenly creating a private 5G network is a quite relatively, easier feat to achieve in a quicker manner. And then if we go on to really, which I haven't covered on today, the next step, which is 5G slicing, which is partitioning public networks, which is really our next step. That gives even greater flexibility to publish news or produce sports events or media-worthy stories, really from anywhere in the country or around the world.
Okay, I also think it might have quite a big impact on news coverage, actually, because you don't need an almost sort of almost military deployment to get somewhere and film and produce the news and turn it around quick. I just think it's just got huge implications.
Yeah, absolutely. Already during lockdown, what we saw was the camera technology was a lot more flexible when people started broadcasting from their homes, but that still required a level of connectivity to get a quality broadcast through. What this does is take away the problem of reliable connectivity, not just in the UK but around the world, particularly when you combine it with low Earth orbit satellites to really produce news or events from anywhere.
So could you just talk to me a little bit more about why network slicing is going to be such a boon or a boost in broadcast and maybe other sectors too? Well, obviously other sectors.
Yeah, absolutely. So 5G private networks were, as I just mentioned, a dedicated network set up for a particular event or scenario. So it relies still on a setup of sorts. What 5G private network does is take advantage of the mobile network that's already established across either this country or other countries. And what it does, it actually partitions that network, much in the way that you think about frequencies that you may get from Ofcom. You can apply and you could use a public network that already exists. So if you talked about the flexibility for Paul McCartney at Glastonbury, if someone didn't have either fiber set up or private network set up, once slicing comes around, you can use a network that already exists to have broadcast grade transmission back into people's homes, really offer simple as an iPhone, which really will be game changing for the production industry.
When I asked the BBC why that happened, they said it was very complicated and about logistics. And I nearly said, gosh, fancy that. What a surprise that was, right? Anyway, where else are you deploying 5G outside live broadcasting? I mean, have you got particular use cases that are feeding back into the broadcast knowledge?
Yeah, so 5G is probably one of the two big bets of technology for BT Group as a whole, alongside fiber deployment to the home. And one of the biggest case studies which is publicised is in Belfast Harbour, which is around port operations. And this is almost a unique environment where you have, interconnectivity between transportation, between logistics. You need a higher level of security. You need dedicated bandwidth, and that solution is live and operating. And most recently, building on from that, an agreement was done with Tyneside within the UK to almost replicate that solution. So 5G is slowly building up, steam across a whole range of industries for BT, and I think it's got a very bright future. If you imagine what people do with 5G, with 4G on their phones currently, and the level of capacity or network coverage or speed they can get from that, and then accelerate that, the use cases really are tremendous and endless.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. So taking what happens in our Belfast Harbour and exporting it, if you like, to Tyneside, I think that's one of the really big questions about monetizing 5G in enterprise solutions. Mm-hmm. It's about how much there's a common kind of horizontal level and how much is customization. Well, you hope configuration rather than too much customization, but still it needs to be adapted per case. And on the other hand, the economies of scale are the critical thing. So it's this really tricky balancing act between meeting exact requirements and replicating and scaling what you've done already, and leveraging the knowledge you've got.
Yeah, and part of that is having a base of customers that allow you to develop common platforms. Earlier in the presentation, I mentioned around our smart broadcast platform. We have most of the broadcasters in the UK that we are serving. So this allows us to develop and invest for a common purpose for a whole range of customers. And that's what we're seeing in other verticals as well. Because, the real discussion and challenge around the industry is, how do customers, monetize this? How do suppliers monetize this? But it's a combination. It's how do you develop at scale to be able to monetize? And then also, how do you fold in the operational efficiencies that allow savings and better operational practices to happen?
So it's quite interesting because I was talking to a colleague, Neil McRae, earlier this week, last week, and he was talking about this horizontal platform versus scaling thing as well. And he said a couple of things because Neil's got a terrific turn of phrase and great insight. So I asked him what one of the keys to success were about this, and he said, which sounds really kind of almost silly at first glance, is he said you need to pick the right customers. But of course, the way he explained it and unpacked it is about you need to find customers who are prepared to go on this journey with you and be open and to explore. And because if you try and work with people where there's a high degree of cynicism or skepticism, really, you're not going to get very far. So I thought that was a really interesting comment from Neil.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really fair reflection, particularly where everyone is on a development and journey of 5G, because things will go wrong, things will need to be developed, and having a collaborative mindset with customers. So if we looked at the rugby production, we did it with production companies that we've worked and have historic relationships with. And the BBC and the Commonwealth Games, we supply their broadcast infrastructure today. So organizations that you're able to work with and develop, particularly at the early stages, are very, very important.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So Faisal, thank you very much. I thought that was really interesting. And by the way, everybody, you'll be able to look at our interview with Neil McRae when we discussed this and much more in our Talking Telecoms week, which takes place between the 28th and the 2nd of December. So watch out for that and check it out. It's a very insightful interview. In the meantime, Faisal, thank you very much. We enjoyed that a lot, and we hope to see you back a little way down the line so that we can see what will happen next.
Very good. Thanks, Annie, and great to speak to you all. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you very much indeed.